Welcome back to the newest episode of Counsel and Commentary. Today I have a fantastic guest, Ryan Fremuth. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, I'm really glad to be here.
Excellent. And this is actually going to be really interesting because we haven't had any attorney do your niche or niches. So it's totally different. We have a lot of PI attorneys and the typical, legal aspects, but this is something totally different. So I think it's going to be highly interesting to most people. And so we'll start. What's kind of like, what drew you into focusing on both psychology and sex crimes? That's their niches.
Yes, so I before I became a lawyer, I was working security at a casino. Was trying to decide, do I want to get a PhD in psychology or do I want to go to law school? Ended up going to law school. But during that process, I was increasingly involved in sort of the psychological side of the legal system. I started as a prosecutor. So what ended up happening was I became the prosecutor for the Veterans Treatment Court in Galveston County for a little while. And then when I switched over to the defense side, I wanted to expand my psychological knowledge base, got my master's, and then started to try to incorporate that more into my day-to-day activities.
Yeah, my dad's a psychologist, so I know it's all the stuff he just like preached to me when I was younger. I'm like, man, it really pays off, especially the business world.
Yeah.
Marketing, reading people, understanding people, what motivates them, and like what's behind all that. So psychology is just a fascinating subject. How does your work differ from other areas of criminal defense and prosecution?
So, because a lot of what I do is defending sex crimes, especially child sex crimes, it kind of requires a different general approach. So, when I handle a murder case, it is very evidence driven, some investigation, going down that path. But with a lot of the sex crimes, they're delayed outcries, oftentimes for years. So there's really very limited evidence that you can uncover as far as what's true, what's not true. So you have to start to try to go in and find what you can evaluate and how you can evaluate it for credibility, consistency, and inconsistency. So the psychological side of that will allow you to kind of go back through the forensic interviews, understand if they were done correctly. So when reviewing forensic interviews, usually you want to watch at least 3 times, once to kind of get your gut feeling about it, once for the content, and once for the performance. And what the forensic interview is that's when they have the Child Advocacy Center or some other certified professional interview the child victim to get their side of the story about what may or may not have happened. Going from there, once you kind of get their story, you need to go down with your client some of the common traps that they emotionally want to say and why those are not rational or reasonable, and kind of get their side of the story so that you can start trying to put the pieces together.
Yeah, it makes sense. What does the day-to-day of your life look like? Because it's like a complex. I'm sure you see a lot of like emotionally compelling cases. What's your day-to-day like for someone like you?
So most mornings, almost every morning, handling my morning docket, kind of going talking to prosecutors about my cases. Then in the afternoon, it's either talking to clients, talking to witnesses, reviewing the evidence that I have. A lot of times, a lot of the evidence I have to go review, I have to go to the district attorney's office because it's legally protected. And then from there, going back, either doing legal research or going through kind of my library of journals to try to figure out what is missing from kind of the psychological side. How can I create a story that matches all the points that would be plausible?
How important is psychology evaluation in these cases?
So in these cases in particular, kind of psychological evaluation of the evidence, the witnesses, the anticipated testimony is critical. With some things, you go in, you have very discrete facts. Again, like on a murder case, you have the murder weapon, you have the ballistics, the testing that was done, maybe GSR. Maybe they did a good job and they took powder patterns off of the decedent, something like that, where you can analyze. But on these, it's really just the words and the statements and the stories. So you have a forensic interview where someone claims something happened. You have their statements to the police afterwards. You might have some other parties that are saying that they heard something or they saw these people interact. And then you have your client's story. So you have to really go through and figure out how do I take this and create something for people to absorb, that they're not going to recoil, that they're not going to just immediately look at you and say, your client's a bad person, you're a bad person for representing them. This person might actually be innocent. And to do that, you have to understand the way their brains work, the way they think about things, the way they feel about things. And you also have to understand what was screwed up in the process from that kind of psychological side.
Can you explain how mental health issues interact or intersect with sex crime cases a lot?
Yes. So what we'll have is you have, this is kind of a two-side story. So you have people that'll have some general mental illness. You might have people that suffer from autism spectrum disorder, or you might have bipolar borderline. A while ago, I had someone, it's the first person I've ever had that was formally diagnosed with dissociative identity disorder, which is multiple personalities. There was a very long and lengthy discussion with him on whether he wanted to end up claiming that he was insane due to the fact that it was his alter ego, or whether he wanted to just claim he didn't do it.
Hmm.
So you have all of those things that will come into play, and those matter for, were they in the right, are they competent to stand trial? Were they in the appropriate mental state to be responsible? But also mitigation. So you might have, for instance, a possession of child pornography case where someone's pretty severely autistic, they're not very social, they're not a danger to the community, they're just viewing things that we very much don't want them to be viewing. That person's a lot lower risk, should have much less consequences than someone else who might be a higher risk. But then on the other side, you have what's called paraphilic disorders. So these are like sexual perversions. So that's where you run into your pedophilia, your hebephilia. So pedophilia is the sexual attraction to prepubescent children. Hebephilia is pubescent children. So you're trying to then assess, how can I stop the prosecutor from using those big, scary, bad words? Because a lot of times you'll have someone that may suffer from at least a paraphilic disorder.
It's very interesting stuff, man. It's crazy. How do you balance empathy and psychology's struggles with the seriousness of these crimes?
So that's very difficult. So these can be extremely emotionally tolling, just on every level, on every aspect. When you get someone that you believe may be wrongfully accused, it's crushing, because all you can think about and worry about is what happens if I don't get it right. Because there's less evidence on these, and people want to believe that it happened. They don't want to believe it was made up. So it's difficult to maintain the appropriate empathy for your client without getting overly invested. But then on the flip side, when you're fairly confident they did it, you have to still maintain that empathy for them as a human, while balancing the fact that you feel really bad for what happened to this other individual. But your role is to stay focused on your client, protect your client's rights and privileges. And at the end of the day, it's up to the state to try to prove it. You have to go in there and force them every step of the way, tooth and nail, claw it out, try to prove it. Psychologically, that can be very draining. A lot of people will end up with some kind of secondary trauma. If you haven't been in therapy at some point over the course of your career, you're probably doing it wrong. A lot of people suffer from substance abuse, and that's very dangerous, very common. It's important to have good, healthy protocols in place for yourself to avoid these traumas from sticking too deeply inside. Have a good support system, have plans in place. Like when you have to watch a video that's particularly heinous or something, you need to know that's going to be the last thing you're going to do in the day. You're going to be drinking cool water, go hang out with your friends, do something social afterwards. If you have intrusive thoughts, you want to say, I'm not thinking about that. I'm thinking about this instead.
What are the biggest misconceptions that the public has about sex crime cases?
So the recidivism rate is a lot lower than people think, is number one. Even high risk, you're still dealing with a much lower recidivism rate. You're not dealing with a group of people that, even if they're guilty, are necessarily going to come back and do it again. It's not as often as people would think, not even close. We're not even talking like 50%. We're talking a lot lower than that. The other thing is that people kind of imagine that there's usually going to be DNA or injuries, things like that. Most of the time, these cases, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years later, if it's a child case, and there's no evidence, it's just the testimony. And does a jury believe or not believe the story that they've been told by the child, and if they do, it's a guilty, and if they don't, it's not. So it's scary in some ways, because when you really think about it, anyone could be accused falsely. And I've had many clients that were falsely accused. I had a man who was accused of a kidnapping, sexual assault, and it simply wasn't true. And eventually the evidence came in to show that it didn't happen, but he spent 9 months in jail before he got released. Um, so not everyone's guilty. Not everyone recidivates, even if they are guilty. And the evidence is a lot less than what you would think.
Yeah, that'd be traumatizing for that person. 9 months. Did he get like some kind of? Did he go back after this day to get some money or no?
No, for him, they had probable cause for an arrest. He could have tried to sue the accuser,
No.
but she has no money. So he's not going to get it.
I'm just curious how that works. Yeah, I know sometimes when they were in jail for like a wrongful murder, like, and they get like a dollar amount based on how long they were there.
Yeah.
How do you navigate cases where there is low psychology or physical evidence, and it's one person's word against another?
Where there is physical evidence, or
Very little physical
very
evidence.
little?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's really breaking down into the minute details of the statement. So you have to consider what is so part of it is you have a plan going in, right? You've gone through all the evidence, you know it like the back of your hand. Maybe there's 10,000 pages of CPS records. There's, 60-page offense report, several hours worth of recordings or videos of people giving statements. You've memorized all of it. You go in and I want to go in, here's kind of the story what I want to tell. And there's only two stories you can tell. There's either the complainant is lying or they're misremembering, right? There's no other avenue, and you know which one you're going down. But then the witnesses take the stand, and as you know, you've been in court before, how they behave, what their demeanor is, dictates how you can interact with them. You can't be aggressive to someone that is sympathetic. You can't be, so you still have to get your points across, but you can't be a shark or a pit bull with an 11-year-old girl that's crying on the witness stand. So you have to approach it more delicately, kind of calmly, and you have to make your points and go with it. So I had one a while ago where there was a girl who she accused a former police officer, and he was eventually acquitted of the allegation. And she had a lot of serious psychological history. A lot of times you get the psychological records, and she told a story, and going through her story, there were certain things that were physically implausible. So we focused heavily on those, and we focused on her history of her pre-existing history of psychological issues from before the alleged abuse. And the jury came back, and they just weren't comfortable saying that this man had done these horrible things, because there was this delusional thinking and these inconsistencies. So you have to try to find those and create those where they can exist.
Makes sense. What role does expert testimony like psychologists play in shaping outcomes?
So quite a lot. So the state on these will oftentimes call an expert psychologist that works for the Child Advocacy Center to testify, kind of as a rubber stamp that everything is an indication that the child is telling the truth. They can't exactly say that, but they backdoor that, and they'll call their forensic interviewer to say they did a great job. So you either need to have the background and the research to force them to admit that they screwed up and that what they're saying is not true, or you have just given the complainant all the credibility in the world. They've been endorsed functionally by 2 to 3 experts. So if you don't either have your own expert or the articles to confront their experts with, you're putting yourself at a very severe disadvantage. And now every case is different. There's different ways to go after their psychologist. It kind of depends on what avenue you're going with. You can either attack them directly on some of the science that they're testifying to. You could go after the fact that kind of the most common way is to say, they'll come in and say everything is a potential sign of abuse, but if you force them to admit normal things are signs of abuse too, and everything is a sign of abuse and nothing is, kind of thing. Or you can go back, if you have therapy records, sometimes you can have an expert come in, whether it's theirs or yours, and have them go through therapy records, and then they won't be able to diagnose this individual because they haven't met with them or treated them, but you can talk them through like the DSM, Diagnostic Statistical Manual, talk about the psychological diagnoses and different symptomology. If it matches what's in the therapy records, you've kind of backdoored them into saying that, hey, this person might have, psychotic disorder or bipolar with psychotic features or schizophrenia or something like
Yeah. How often do you see like borderline personality? Because I know that's kind of
that.
like one sporadic.
Yeah, borderline. I'll see a lot of borderline. I will see a lot of in the complainants. I see a lot of narcissistic personality disorder on both sides of the aisle. Whenever I have a client who's telling me that the complaining witness is either a narcissist or a sociopath, antisocial, I always warn them that they're probably going to be very effective at testimony because of the way that personality pattern works. We're going to have to come up with a plan to try to show who they are.
So the dark triad shade, basically.
Yeah.
The dark triads. Okay. How do you see the legal system balancing justice for victims with the rights of the accused?
Um, in some ways it does a good job, and in some ways it does the worst job. So the accused, we have, of course, they have their constitutional and their legal rights, and these are important because if they don't apply to them, they apply to no one. So no matter how bad what someone is accused of doing is, we need to make sure that their rights are protected. Otherwise, tomorrow, who knows who won't have rights. But these people will oftentimes be on very high bonds, stuck in jail for years at a time. And these are not fast cases to go to trial, 1, 2, 3 years. And sometimes they'll get dismissed right before trial. And you'll have people just sitting in jail, waiting. The state they're a little bit better on this kind of case where they'll try to get you evidence early because they've done some investigation first, but they're still trying to do more investigation while the case is pending, get more stuff. So you have people that are just languishing in the system, and I can't imagine how stressful and miserable it would be to have to keep coming to court every month to deal with being accused of a sexual offense, whether adult or child. Then with the victims, they have functionally, the prosecutors will want to talk to them and get their feelings, but they don't really have a say in how things happen. And the system isn't designed to fix them or help them. It really is just a system of re-traumatizing them. Every time they have to retell what happened, if it actually happened, it reopens those wounds, and then they get cross-examined and somebody shows up and is more or less calling them a liar, and bringing up all these bad things in their life. And that's also going to be traumatizing as well. So they want their justice, they show up, they go through it. And if there's a conviction, they feel vindicated, I'm sure, but it doesn't really fix what happened to them. There should be something more to help them with their emotional, psychological needs after a conviction. But that's not currently in place. And then for the people that are wrongfully accused or acquitted, oftentimes these generate media headlines. Their life in many ways is over. They try to apply for a job, they get Googled. The first thing that comes up is accused of sexual assault, accused of sexual assault of a child, accused of whatever. It's really not fair.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's yeah, I can just see that, just reopening of wounds that just don't go away. It's terrible. Are there reforms or changes you believe would improve how these cases are handled?
Yes, I do think, just as a general rule of thumb in the criminal system, if the state would file the charge after they have all their evidence, that's what is, in my opinion, that's why we have statutes of limitations, so they can finish their investigation. These would move faster. They would take less time. It would delays would be more on us, right? Trying to make sure we've reviewed everything, investigated everything. But that would speed the process up, which would give less opportunity for re-traumatization of the victims and less risk towards innocent people being incarcerated for lengthy periods of time or having these things hanging over their heads. I do think that we should be looking into changing what we're allowing some of the psychological testimony to be. There's some sketchy science that gets testified to about the symptoms of trauma that are outside of what is necessarily demonstrably provable by the research. Sometimes a lot of judges will let experts go a little farther than they really should. And that's dangerous on both sides. If you let me call somebody in that's going to say a lot of extra stuff that's maybe not scientifically valid necessarily, but they're of the opinion that it should be allowed, I might get a much better outcome than I should, based on the evidence. And if you let the state do the same, you may end up convicting an innocent person.
What should someone do if they or their loved one are falsely accused of a sex crime?
Number one, do not talk to the police. Once they are thinking about talking to you about it, they have decided you are guilty, and they might change their mind later, but anything you say, they are going to twist and manipulate against you. Once there's an accusation and you know it, the first thing you need to do is get in touch with an attorney, get somebody to represent you, even if it's still in the investigation phase, pay somebody to help you through the investigation, because at the end of the investigation, if they file charges or not, anything that's been done to try to help protect you during that time is going to pay dividends later.
What warning signs that a case may involve psychology manipulation or false memory issues?
So the first thing you want to look for kind of memory issues or potentially fabrication would be either impossibilities or implausibilities. So that's a clear sign that there's something wrong. If somebody's saying it happened a certain way that doesn't seem reasonable or realistic, there's a pretty good chance there's a problem. With the kind of coaching, it's harder when they're older, when you're dealing with kind of older people, adults or teenagers. But if you have young children using very adult language, now you have a real concern, because, there's a way a 4, 5, 6, 8-year-old is going to describe something, and there's a way an adult's going to describe it. And that's not usually the same. So once you see inappropriate language for the age or kind of inconsistencies, implausibilities, you need to have a big red flag.
That makes sense. This is kind of interesting. For professionals like teachers, coaches, therapists, what are the best ways to protect themselves legally or working closely with others?
So to protect yourselves from a false allegation, really it's kind of documentation and making sure that you are not in a position where you're completely alone. So if you're a teacher and you have a kid after class talking to you, leave the door open. You don't need to close the door, because you'd be surprised how many times, it turns out that the teacher with their door closed gets accused. And if you were like a therapist, I would get consent to be recording my sessions. My mom is a retired psychologist, but someone she knew was falsely accused years and years ago, and it ended up working out because he had recorded his sessions and he was able to prove that it was false. But minimize contact that is in a dangerous environment. So if you're alone with someone, make sure that people know, and that there's access for other people, so that there's potential witnesses. Leave the door open. Don't have the neighbor's kid alone over to have cookies in your house.
Right. No, that's some great advice. I mean, protect yourself in that regard. What's the hardest case you've ever handled without breaching confidentiality?
So I had one a few years ago where he ended up being acquitted. It was a really, really serious allegation. It was not the first time he'd been accused. And there was some concerning information that came out through the case in terms of what was alleged. Put it simply, the new victim was the child of his first victim. And that one was emotionally exhausting on every possible level. There was very little to work with as far as the defense, and we ended up going through and spent so many hours going through the statements that we were able to kind of find where her testimony was a little bit different and start picking that apart. and eventually there were enough holes that he was free. And I mean, nobody will ever know. There's research on this, like how good are we at telling the truth? We're not. Lawyers, detectives, polygraphers, people doing the lie detector tests, psychologists. We're about as good as a coin flip on knowing if somebody's telling the truth or not, which is kind of scary when you think about it. We want people to make these decisions. We're not good at making these decisions, but managed to keep out all of the prior allegations on some procedural grounds, limited the expert testimony because the state was too zealous in their attempt to use it, and really hamstrung the case. And
Yeah, I'm sorry.
oh no, yeah, that one. I remember that one case. I was not sure if I wanted to do these anymore, and I had these horrible nightmares during the trial about like my family and friends getting falsely accused, and I came in the next day just laser focused. I was like, I need to do this because this is kind of the scariest allegation out there, and people are falsely accused every day.
Yeah, well, good thing you won. How do you personally cope with these emotional weight of working in such sensitive cases?
So I do maintain intermittent counseling sessions to make sure that I'm handling any secondary trauma. I've got a pretty good kind of system in place where when I'm doing something extremely heavy duty, I make sure I end my day with that and I go do something social with people afterwards. And I actively go out of my way not to hyperfixate on it. So if I have thoughts intrude, I say, I'm thinking about this instead. I just refuse to allow it to kind of stay in there. And then I focus on kind of, I try to focus on what I can control. And what I can control is how I process the evidence, how I present the defense. And nothing else is within my control. What happened, what's alleged, none of that's in my control. So I try not to get too stuck on, did he do it? Did he not do it? It doesn't change anything, and it can only cause me trauma.
Yeah. Yeah, it's tough industry, man. It's crazy. That's why it's like the first one I've even interviewed. That's how unique the industry is, or limited. And I was talking with Sal from Top Attorneys in North America, who sponsors this, and we're always talking about what advice would you give young attorneys who are considering to specialize in this area?
So try cases early in your career, get into the courtroom, get into trial, because those trial skills are transferable. Trying a misdemeanor DWI, trying an aggravated sexual assault of a child, and trying a murder, it's all still a trial. The rules of evidence still apply. The law might be a little different on certain things that you can do, but it's basically the same thing. So get as much trial experience early as you can. From there, if you really want to get involved in this kind of thing, stick your toes in, go sit with somebody on one of these cases, try to second share one or two, see what it's really like. And if it's something that you're comfortable with, that you can handle emotionally, because not everybody can. There's nothing wrong with being somebody that says, I can't handle those cases. That's me on animal cruelty. I can't do it. I just, I see a dog that got hurt. I can't handle that. I'm not emotionally able to process that well. So everybody's going to have their thing. If it's not your thing, that's fine. If it is your thing, if you can do it, you have to remember you need to start getting experience, and you need to start looking into the psychology, because whether it's your client has some sort of psychiatric disorder to try to mitigate, the complainant has a psychiatric disorder to say that it didn't happen, or you need to deal with the state psychologist, you want to at least have a background understanding of what we're all talking about in that courtroom.
Yeah, that makes sense. And as we wrap this up, how can people find out more about you, Ryan? It's been great. I like how you're concise with the answers, and it's like, that's how I like it. Where can people find out more about you and your firm?
Absolutely. So my website is fremuth.com. They can check me out there. I also have a LinkedIn, and I'm always available for contact either through the website or on LinkedIn.
Perfect. I'll include the show notes below, both those links. Again, thank you for your time and your insights. It was very interesting because it's a tough subject, man, but somebody's got to do it.
Yeah, somebody's got to do it.
Thanks again, Ryan. Appreciate
You're
your
very
time.
welcome.
Thank you for listening to Counsel and Commentary. This episode has been brought to you by the top attorneys of North America.